Hey, now, just in terms of the tiger snake, I mean, it is pretty tragic news here, of course. This man killed by a giant tiger snake. And the coroner did say it was tragic, but it is a rare occurrence. So it is rare?
Look, it is very rare. While Australia's got the most deadly snakes in the world, and the tiger snake is the fifth most deadly snake in the world, they're generally very shy creatures. They don't want to fight you, they don't want to bite you, unless they feel provoked in some way or they feel attacked. Now, I don't know the circumstance that led to the tiger snake biting the gentleman in Tasmania. I don't believe it was deliberately attacked in any way, and I'm not saying that, but a tiger snake can feel provoked, and when they feel provoked, that's when they bite.
And it sounds like he died from his bites, right? But the wrapping of around the body is just something, because obviously it was a very big one, nearly 1.5 meters. It's something that they do, right?
It's something that they can do, and this is the interesting thing. I've got pet tiger snakes at home. I spent my lifetime understanding tiger snakes. Usually when they bite, they'll bite quickly and then let go. When they bite and wrap on and hang on, it's usually when they want to eat something. So it's a very unusual circumstance to have a 1.5 meter tiger snake biting and hanging on to somebody at the same time. And from what I read of the news reports as well, the body was wrapped around his arm and his neck at the same time.
Because I thought you had snakes, they were either constrictors or they were venomous snakes, but you're saying these do both.
Sometimes they do both. So I have some of the venomous snakes at home when I feed them. Sometimes they just bite and hang on. Sometimes they bite and hang on and then wrap around at the same time. Sometimes they just bite and let go and let the venom take effect. Often when I've seen a tiger snake eat a blue-tongued lizard, for example, they bite and wrap around at the exact same time. So it's just something that they can do. Many people think, like you said, they either bite or wrap, but sometimes they can do both.
Mark, you take care, and again, we are sorry for calling you while you're grappling with a tiger snake.
No, you're welcome to call me anytime. My apologies for not being able to answer. I thought my hands were tied.
Literally, Zina Jalil and Chris Wickheimer, thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you.
I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow for Friday's show. Amy Adams and Sam Johnson on the show tomorrow.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, pop goes the plans for a Cook Islands Christmas travel bubble, but it's not just visitors they're short on. Auckland Ports has been slammed over freight delays and failures in its automated system. We go wharf side. The tide's out at Auckland's dams, so will the super city have enough water for the long, hot summer? Why declaring a climate change emergency could cost New Zealand workers almost $3,000 a year. Flash new technology is helping keep Auckland's plastics out of the tip, but is it the solution to the city's waste woes? Will they play or will they go home? The waiting game continues for the Pakistani cricket team as more COVID-19 cases emerge. And Kmart stocks a new range of dolls.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening. Ko Kainwin Curtis Tierney. Some tourism operators say they're at their wits' end after months of promised updates and ongoing delays to putting the Cook Islands travel bubble in place. This comes as the COVID-19 response minister popped any plans of a bubble before Christmas. Chris Hipkins says a timeline on the next steps will be available in the coming weeks, but his words don't provide any comfort to Craig Bennett of Sea Change Villas in Rarotonga, who says he's quickly losing patience over a lack of action.
For the attitude to be taken by the ministers in New Zealand and in the Cook Islands to be unable to sit down and figure something out over the last 8 or 9 months is beyond me.
Rarotonga resort owner and manager Craig Bennett. Westpac says reaching carbon neutral status will require everyone taking about a $60 a week hit on their household income. An economist says that's due to the likely impact of income growth if New Zealand stays on track for its climate goals. Westpac chief economist Dominic Stevens says it could mean the economy grows at a slightly slower rate each year.
Our average incomes across society will continue to grow, but more slowly. And by my calculations, by 2050, average incomes might be $2,700 a year lower than they would have been had we not had to decarbonise.
Economist Dominic Stevens. Work has started on setting up an inquiry into Pharmac, but it's unlikely to have access to commercial information. There have been calls for an inquiry into how the drug buying agency makes its decisions and how it prioritises the drugs it funds. Today, an opposition attempt to hold a select committee inquiry was voted down. However, the Health Minister, Andrew Little, says the terms of reference for a separate inquiry are being developed and a person to head it will be chosen, but he's signalled its access will be limited.
There's a range of things they can do without having to get into issues of commercial confidentiality, such as the way they make decisions on new technologies, and it may well extend to the way the current budget is being utilised.
Andrew Little says it's crucial the inquiry is carried out independently of politicians. However, his office would not confirm exactly what form it will take. Police say investigations are continuing into the killing of a man in Wellsford, despite finding two people they were looking for this afternoon. Zane Smith was shot dead in his car on Saturday on Weibai Station Road, Wellsford, north of Auckland. Eva Corlett reports.
A 45-year-old man is under guard in Auckland City Hospital. He was found unresponsive in a central Auckland address and taken to hospital by ambulance. A 21-year-old woman handed herself into police at Auckland City Station. She has been charged with being an accessory after the fact to murder. Police say she was due to appear in North Shore District Court today. Detective Inspector Scott Beard says police inquiries are continuing, although they are not seeking anyone else. Ko Eva Corlett, tēnei.
The government has axed Latin from the NCEA. It's also cut specialist subjects, including art history and classics, from level 1 of the qualification. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The government says level 1 of the national school qualification includes too many specialised subjects. Today it announced changes it says will stop students from narrowing their options too soon. Latin, studied by 200 students, is gone from all levels of the qualification, while media studies, psychology, art history and classical studies have been cut from level 1. Physics and earth and space science are combined at level 1, as are chemistry and biology. There are 2 new subjects at level 1, Maori performing arts and the nature of science. Ko John Gerritsen, tēnei.
It's 4 minutes past 5. In sport, a 100-run second wicket stand between skipper Kane Williamson and opener Tom Latham has given the Black Caps the upper hand on day 1 of the first cricket test against the West Indies in Hamilton. A short time ago, the Black Caps were 124 for 1 with Latham on 60 and Williamson on 49, having put 106 for the second wicket after recovering from 14 for 1 when debutant Will Young was dismissed for 5. The West Indies have failed to make the most of the bowler-friendly conditions on a green seaming Seddon Park wicket after the tourists won the toss and opted to bowl. Maori All Blacks coach Clayton McMillan has focused on creating a relaxed environment in the group ahead of Saturday night's game against Moana Pacifica in Hamilton. There's a changing of the guard within the Maori All Blacks with 8 debutants named in the matchday squad. McMillan says he's purposefully tried to keep things low-key.
Coming off the back of pretty arduous Mitre 10 Cup presents some challenges, but you come into this environment and it's high energy and there's a lot of laughter and everyone's pretty familiar with each other, so it doesn't take long to build the connections, and the rugby side of stuff has been fairly low key, just getting some clarity in at the beginning of the week, and we'll start to ramp up the intensity as we get through the next couple of days.
Clayton McMillan. Auckland will host the penultimate round of the Australian Supercars Championship Series next year, with confirmation of the calendar for 2021. The Auckland race is scheduled to be held on November 6th and 7th, but a venue and final details are still being finalised. That's the news.
A COVID-19 vaccine approved.
It will be the first time that people outside of clinical trials will get access to our vaccine.
The start of the pandemic's end?
The scientists have done it. They've used the virus itself to perform a kind of biological jiu-jitsu.
New Zealand's bid for a cure.
Some of the highest pressure is going to be coming from those countries where people are dying every day.
Anticipating the world's return to normal. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday, Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine weather today, cloudy periods tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine weather there as well. Taupo, Taumaranui, Taihape and Taranaki to Wellington, fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow though, with isolated showers north of Wellington. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine weather but a few showers about the ranges of northwest Nelson and a few spots of rain over Canterbury tomorrow. For Buller, cloudy periods with a few showers. Westland, Fiordland, showers turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Otago, Southland, showers about the Southland coast today, otherwise fine. Showers spreading throughout for a time tomorrow, possibly heavy in the east tomorrow afternoon or evening. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with patchy rain clearing this evening, developing again tomorrow afternoon. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Some tourism operators in the Cook Islands say they're at their wits' end after months of promised updates and ongoing delays to getting a travel bubble with New Zealand. The COVID ministers popped any plans for a bubble before Christmas, saying more work needs to be done between the two countries. But tourism isn't the only industry in the Cooks crying out for help. Some critical workers are missing too. Katie Todd reports.
New Zealand officials travelled to the Cook Islands last month to look at how a possible travel bubble would work. But the COVID-19 response minister Chris Hipkins says there's still work to do to get it in place.
They looked at the robustness of the border arrangements. They're relatively confident in the border arrangements on both sides. Probably there are some issues that still to be worked through around scenario planning. So what would happen in the event that someone in the Cook Islands ended up with COVID-19? What would we do? What would happen around testing and contact tracing? Still a bit of work to do between the two countries around that.
However, the minister says he hopes to have an updated timeline on the bubble this side of Christmas. He's now indicated New Zealanders may be able to put it on their early 2021 travel list.
I'm feeling optimistic, certainly in the early part of next year, that we'll see some significant movement in that space. There's still some things that we have to work through, including resurgence planning. So we've got to have plans in place for if any of the areas where we had a safe travel zone were to experience a COVID-19 resurgence, what would we do? And that's something that I think all of the countries involved want to make sure that we've got plans in place.
Those words are not such welcome news to an owner and manager of Sea Change Villas in Rarotonga, Craig Bennett, who says he's quickly losing patience over what he sees as a lack of action. After struggling to survive on government subsidies, Mr Bennett and his wife have had to temporarily move back to their home country of Australia.
The patience amongst operators to be able to keep going and their abilities to be able to keep going in the current situation is extremely difficult and extremely frustrating. And for the attitude to be taken by the ministers in New Zealand and in the Cook Islands to be unable to sit down and figure something out over the last 8 or 9 months is beyond me.
Mr Bennett's frustration is echoed by Liana Scott, the manager of the Maori Beach Club Hotel in Rarotonga and president of the Cook Islands Tourism Industry Council. She's already spent weeks helping run workshops on the islands so businesses are prepared for visitors.
Just so that restaurants are prepared for different practices that they sort of had to get used to, hotels, so everyone preparing for in the event of the border opening, but also in the event that there is a probable case on the island.
Ms Scott says it's not just her industry which is suffering while New Zealand's border is shut, but those which need specialists or qualified people. Breast screening equipment on the island is going unused because there's no technicians to operate it. And she says the island is down to its last qualified veterinarian to care for its animals, a volunteer from Australia.
She's going back in January, so there's quite a bit of concern of what happens to the welfare of the animals here.
Managing Director of Auckland travel agency Our World and Our Pacific, Rick Felderhoff, says both the New Zealand and Cook Islands governments need to provide more information.
My disappointment is that the government is simply saying it's not going to happen before Christmas, but there's actually no plan in place. Well, I would have thought a better way would be to lock a travel date in the future that's realistic and then work backwards with an announcement date so that everyone is clear on what the plan is and what needs to happen between announcement and travel dates.
COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins was asked about progress on a travel bubble with Australia. He expects he can provide an update on that soon. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, TNA.
Ports of Auckland has had a torrid past few months with increasing pressure from importers and retailers to speed up stock movement through the port. The company insists the delays are due to staff shortages, despite workers telling Checkpoint the move to automated straddle carriers to shift containers is to blame. So Checkpoint wanted to see these new robot carriers in action. We sent reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe for a morning on the wharves.
This is one Auckland's shiny new toys, a 16-metre, 70-tonne robot known as a straddle carrier that finds its way around these docks on its own. It magically locates the back of a truck and gets itself into position, ready to drop a container of supplies so they can be delivered to retailers desperate to get their shelves stocked in time for the holiday rush. A wharfie equipped with controls slightly more sophisticated than your standard PlayStation controller takes over, pinpointing the truck trailer, dropping the load and giving the driver the all clear. These are the sort of technological advancements that would usually be a PR dream for a company like Ports of Auckland. Instead, the headlines have been less than glowing.
Import delays force Christmas shopping squeeze for retailers. Importers demand answers over delays at ports. Another setback at Auckland Port over automation floor.
There's no doubt Ports of Auckland is under pressure. Christmas is coming and the snarl-up has importers and retailers worried they won't have sufficient stock to service customers' wish lists.
We all live and shop here in Auckland and we understand and feel the problems acutely.
That's Ross Clark, the man overseeing a massive change at Auckland's port. And it's this shift to a robotic future that some who work these wharves claim is behind delays shifting freight.
Behind me you can see the port's yellow manual straddle carriers working the truck grid, but they've slowly moved to these guys. These are 16-metre automated straddle carriers.
The port company hails its automated straddle carriers as a new capacity-boosting, sustainable way of operating. Critics, on the other hand, believe manual operations would better clear a backlog which has some ships waiting nearly 2 weeks to berth after arriving in the Hauraki Gulf. Despite all that, Ross Clark, who's Ports of Auckland's automation project manager, is adamant the project is not to blame.
The automation system is working pretty much as we had expected. It's not the cause of the delays that are being experienced. That really is down to our shortage of operational staff.
He concedes, however, a slip-up on Sunday did not help. One of the 70-tonne robotic straddle carriers went rogue, hitting a retaining wall before coming to a stop.
Obviously, we're disappointed with the incident that occurred on Sunday, and we would very much prefer that those sorts of things didn't happen.
That incident, which has left one of these new robots with a few prominent white scrape marks, suspended automation completely.
Well, we had to halt operations for a while, ask our supplier to analyse the root cause of the incident and then receive a report from them as to how they would rectify that and then implement that fix. Then, of course, we test to ensure that the fix does resolve the problem. And then, of course, we needed to regain the trust of our people and demonstrate to them that, again, the core safety functionality of the system was not compromised in any way at all.
Mr. Clark says the automatic machines are now back up and running. The next milestone is to complete the automation project. At the moment, the port is operating in a half-to-half fashion, with the old manual straddle carriers still crucial to shifting freight. The port's blaming staffing issues for delays in processing freight once it's arrived. General Manager of Communications Matt Ball told Checkpoint last month Ports of Auckland had been short about 30 staff in the past few years, but with COVID-19 making the situation worse, they are now in need of another 50 staff. Today we asked Mr Ball, who admits the port is overwhelmed, how that recruitment drive is going.
Despite it being a hard labour market, we are actually making reasonable progress. We've got a skilled crane operator who started work this week, and we've got some former straddle drivers from Ports of Auckland who come back to work for us, and we'll just keep plugging on with us. You know, we'll get through the training, but we're looking for more people. If anyone out there is looking for a job, it's a great place to work.
Meanwhile, some shipping companies have started diverting to Tauranga or Northland instead of dealing with the snarl up in Auckland. Mr Ball concedes that's not a good look.
No, we're gutted. Normally every year when you get a busy peak season, we're the port that sped the ships up, that got them back on their timetable. So for us not to be able to do that this year is really gutting. And we are working as hard as we can to get back to that position where we are the most productive port and we're pushing the ships through again. We will do it. It is going to take us a bit of time, but we're going to get there.
For now, though, with a waning workforce and questions hanging over its new machinery, the port faces a race against time to help get gifts under the tree on Christmas morning. For Checkpoint, Nick Trowbridge.
It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And if you were listening to that story from the two Nicks, we'll put the video up on our Facebook page so you can watch it too. We would love to hear from you on the Cook Islands travel bubble. Do you reckon we're ready to go now and it should start before Christmas? Also interested if you're waiting on goods coming through the port or you're actually working on the wharves. Let us know what the situation is like for you. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's not clear when the Pakistan cricket team will be able to train or if all the players will be released from MIQ in time for the first match of the tour after some of the squad tested positive for COVID. 10 people from the visiting side have the virus, with some of those cases deemed historic. The visitors are also on their last warning after it was revealed some players breached isolation rules, mingling together and sharing food. And the team had its exemption to train after day 3 testing cancelled after it was discovered some were infected. I asked sports reporter Clay Wilson what all of this means for the game schedule.
Well, they're still not training. They were supposed to be training as of day 4. But the Minister for COVID Response, Chris Hipkins, confirmed yesterday that still wasn't happening, and he still wasn't sure when that was going to happen. Of course, we do have these positive cases, but some of the players are negative and appear to be safe, but they're still not allowed to go out and train. We don't know. Chris Hipkins says he's waiting for advice from local health officials down there in Christchurch about them saying that it's okay, and then he'll get the final clearance on that. But he said he doesn't have any notice from them as of this point that that's going to happen at any particular day. Hopefully, I'm sure they'll be hoping it will be soon, but we don't know when that will be.
So what do you know about when they're supposed to get out and if they will be able to get out, given that some of them are infected while others aren't?
Yeah, we still don't know that either. New Zealand Cricket say the schedule for the matches hasn't changed. They're supposed to be playing the first T20 on the 18th of December. They're supposed to be out next Tuesday. But we still don't know whether some of those players are going to be able to come out if they are negative and deemed to be safe, or whether they're going to wait to do it as a whole squad. So really there's a lot of things up in the air here. Will some of them get out? Will all of them get out? Will they have to stay in longer? We're not sure. But of course, these games are coming around pretty fast. December 18 is not that far away. Not only do they need to train, but they need to be out to be able to play these games in the first place.
So is there any suggestion yet that first game won't go ahead?
Not as yet. New Zealand Cricket have told us today that the schedule hasn't changed, but of course they're working day to day like everyone else is, so they're probably waiting on further advice or things to develop further in terms of what's going to happen with the team, but they're still planning for that first T20 to go ahead on December 18 as planned.
So how panicked will the team be about not being able to train? What difference will it make to them?
Well, of course, this is elite sports, professional sport. They're preparing to play a Black Caps team who, of course, are going to come into these games on the back of 3 T20s against the West Indies and 2 Test matches. So a lot of these New Zealand players would have been playing competitive games, and that makes a difference. It's not the same as you might compare it to rugby when the Wallabies came here. Of course, rugby is a physical, high-contact sport, and the players need to be getting those sort of reps in and getting their bodies used to that kind of sport, whereas cricket is less so like that. But of course, it's still important to be able to go out and train if they're going to go out and compete against a Black Caps team, not only playing at home, but also who are going to have games under their belt.
What can you tell us about the testing regime and the monitoring that is happening with this team?
Well, for a normal person going into MIQ, they get tested on day 3 and day 12. Now, we know this Pakistan team has been tested on days 1, 3, 6 and 9, which is day 9 is today, and they're also going to be tested on day 12. So obviously the Ministry of Health and health officials are taking a very watchful approach with this Pakistan team, knowing what's going on, perhaps even before they even knew this, judging by the fact that they were tested on day 1 as well. So they're watching it very closely. So I guess that's the best hope we can have, is that they are being tested more than the average person. And hopefully through that, we're going to be able to keep a really close eye on who's positive, who's negative, who's safe and who isn't.
Given the drought that there's been with sport during this global pandemic, I mean, how anticipated are these games?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, the game's going on against the West Indies at the moment. I guess we've got that sort of return to international cricket back. But it's a big summer for New Zealand, not only hosting West Indies, Pakistan, Bangladesh and then Australia. And sports fans have been starved of this kind of stuff for the last 9 months or so. So, of course, to lose any of these games is going to be a big blow, but also to New Zealand cricket financially. These games are worth a lot financially, so that's on the line for them here. Any of these games that fall over, they stand to lose some money out of it. But certainly for cricket fans, they don't want to lose any international games, given we haven't seen any for so long.
And that's sports reporter Clay Wilson there. We requested an interview with New Zealand Cricket CEO David White and its new chairman Martin Snedden, but both declined. Watermelon farmers in Tonga have shed tears of joy over the announcement their exports will be allowed into New Zealand again on a trial basis. The Ministry for Primary Industries has issued a temporary approval permit, lifting a nearly 2-month ban on the Tongan watermelons. Koro Vakautu has the details.
New Zealand halted imports of the watermelons in October when live fruit flies were found at the border on a shipment. It was a devastating blow for Tongan farmers, with imports expected to be worth up to $2 million New Zealand dollars. In a statement, Peter Thompson from Biosecurity New Zealand underlined how important it was to keep the fruit fly out. His comments have been voiced.
New Zealand is currently free from fruit fly species that attack commercial fruit. If introduced to New Zealand, these fruit flies could have devastating consequences to our horticultural production and trade.
However, at this stage, New Zealand's happy to give Tonga approval to implement corrective action and improved processes for exporting. Kafuika Lautaimi is a farmer in Tonga and was emotional when he was told the news.
Man, I was over the moon, man. I was there in the meeting of opening the pathway, even though it's temporary, but the way I feel when I sit there, when they say it's open, tears drop from my face of joy.
Mr. Lautaimi says he lost at least $12,500 New Zealand dollars because of the suspension.
I lose so much. 7 weeks ago, it's really hard to see what happens, but I can see my workers, they depend on that watermelon was supposed to export overseas.
Sitione Filimone Moasika is another farmer in Tonga who lost nearly $19,000 over the past few weeks. He spoke via his daughter Vika, who translated.
To them, watermelon growers, this is the very first priority of their source of income, of exporting the watermelon to New Zealand. So this news is very exciting to all of them.
However, in his statement, Peter Thompson says it's critical New Zealand's Ministry for Primary Industries had confidence that processes were being fully implemented before exports were fully reinstated.
Tonga will need to complete the trial shipments without any non-compliance. MPI will then fully reopen the pathway and closely monitor it to ensure export processes continue to be undertaken.
Tonga's Trade Minister, Samuel Vaipulu, says work's underway to establish a more organised system to avoid fruit fly larvae being left in produce.
We would have fumigation and we would have a better record of day of planting and pesticides we use, so that we have a record of when it goes from farmers' plantations to quarantine and the pack houses, which was negligently ignored in the past.
Mr Vaipulu says new pack houses and facilities are currently being constructed and a new shipment of watermelons would be sent within the next week. Both farmers say their workers will now have a much happier Christmas. For Checkpoint, ko koro wakauta tēnei.
It's hoped a major investment in Auckland's recycling infrastructure will ensure hundreds of tonnes of previously dumped plastic doesn't end up in the tip. Hard to recycle plastics have been increasingly difficult to process after China, which previously took around half of the world's waste, banned imports. The Auckland upgrade will mean around a third of the city's plastic can now be recycled locally. But as reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Simon Rogers found out, it's not a silver bullet to the city's waste woes.
Inside Auckland Council's busy recycling facility, drink bottles, ice cream tubs and takeaway containers from your bins all end up here. Sorting out all this plastic is a mammoth task, and previously much of it went to waste because it couldn't be identified. But a new $600,000 upgrade means flash technology can detect and sort 99% of the different types of colours and polymers. Air jets then blow that object into the correct stream to be compressed and baled up. From next year, hard-to-recycle plastics will need a permit to leave the country. Mayor Phil Goff says it's a relief to start reducing this now.
Our overseas markets for recycling are gradually closing, and this means that we can recycle more than a third of our plastic onshore here in Auckland. We used to send everything to China. Their national sword policy came out. They stopped taking recycling from other countries. Then we sent it to Indonesia and Malaysia. They said, look, we've had enough of recycling, waste product from first world countries. There's still a few markets open, but ultimately we need to take responsibility for recycling our own goods onshore.
Local recycler Astron Sustainability will receive 2,200 tonnes of plastics 2 and 5 thanks to the upgrade. Previously, that was going overseas or to landfill. General Manager Stephen Mead says while we can now do most of the recycling here, if there's no demand for the new products, it'll still have to head offshore.
So there still needs to be significantly more investment in infrastructure, and there needs to be a greater commitment from the broader plastics industry to utilise recycled plastic. Otherwise, the whole thing falls over if there isn't downstream demand.
Last year, Auckland sent around 1,400 tonnes of plastics to the dump, as there was no market for the material anywhere in the world. But Stephen Mead says these new products will give that plastic a second life, from pipes to flower pots.
So we put the plastic through an intensive washing process, then the material is melted and filtered and decontaminated, then repurposed.
Public submissions close tomorrow on the government's plans to phase out more single-use and hard-to-recycle plastics. Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, Councillor Richard Hills, is in full support of the proposal in dealing with plastic at the source.
While the recycling and the changes are positive, we'd prefer if people weren't using this plastic in the first place and reducing their use. So also working with the government on banning some of those really hard to use plastics. So the 1s, the 2s, the 5s that we're recycling here and getting good value out of, that's great. But the rest, which is only about 1% of our total plastics, we still are landfilling those because they are hard to get a market for, they're hard to turn into anything else.
Paper and cardboard are the next culprits, contributing 55,000 tonnes to Auckland's recycling each year. Next year, work could be underway for a $16 million project to improve the way it's sorted. The combined upgrades to plastic and fibre will increase Auckland's total recycling processing capacity by 28%. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Louise Tanuth aho.
Plans for a proposed airport in a small South Island town face strong pushback during a Christchurch City Council meeting today. Just a day after the New Zealand government declared a climate emergency, protesters pretended to die in front of Christchurch councillors with a message to stop plans for an international airport being built at Tarras in central Otago. Alicia Foon has more.
Flat on their backs, with large wooden crosses laid across their chests, climate activists played dead in front of Christchurch City councillors as they joined Tarras residents opposing the proposal for an international airport in the small central Otago town. the council and Christchurch Airport, accused of hypocrisy on their commitments to lower carbon emissions.
I'm ashamed to live under a council who freely calls climate activists inspiring and then turns around and does something so objectively opposed to our mission. But declaration of a climate emergency means nothing if you are not willing to act by it.
That's Kira Foley from Schools Strike for Climate Change, one of 4 opposition groups who spoke during the City Council's Finance and Performance Committee meeting today. Christchurch Airport announced in July it had bought land in the small town of Tarras and intended to build an airport there to attract the nearby Queenstown tourism market. Sustainable Tarras representative Chris Goddard estimates more than 10,000 people would be affected by the airport.
We know that there is community outrage and impacts to social licence to operate. It will be a rural community changed forever from a farming community to a heavy industrial community based on the airport proposal.
He called on the release of the draft business case, plans and timeline in a bid for transparency about the new airport. The airport is 75% owned by the City Council's holding company, of which 4 councillors, including the Mayor, sit on the board. Christchurch Airport Chief Executive Malcolm Johns was unavailable for comment, but Project Director Michael Singleton gave this statement, which we have revoiced.
Climate change plays a major role in our decision-making at Christchurch Airport, and in the Tarras project we are exploring how to best deliver future air services to the South Island in a sustainable, low-carbon way is a complex issue and one we need to develop solutions for. We are openly sharing information with the community and have so far met with more than 100 people in and around Tarras about our project.
He says Tarras Airport is expected to be operational within 15 years and would cost hundreds of millions to build. Christchurch City Council has set itself the target of becoming carbon neutral by 2030, with City Councillors Tim Scandrett saying they'll be taking everything from today into account.
I would hate to think that Christchurch City Council is seen as, for want of a better term, overbearing into a community, a rural community somewhere else in the country.
For Checkpoint, ko Elisha Foon Tēnei.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the social housing wait list reaches a new high. An advocacy group applauds a retail chain's decision to stock dolls with Down syndrome. And a medical miracle in the United States is an embryo frozen in October 1992 is born in October 2020. We would love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Here's Kainwan with the headlines.
Patience is running out for some Cook Islands tourism operators due to the ongoing delays in establishing a travel bubble. COVID-19 response minister Chris Hipkins has popped plans of a bubble before Christmas and says a timeline will be set in the coming weeks. Craig Bennett of Sea Change Villas in Rarotonga says he's quickly losing patience for the leaders of both nations to make something happen. A woman has appeared in court charged in connection with the killing of a man in Wellsford, north of Auckland. The 21-year-old has been charged with being an accessory after the fact to murder in the North Shore District Court. She's been granted bail and remanded to reappear later this month. A woman has been electrocuted at a workplace on the west coast. The police say they received a call out on Upper Buller Gorge Road just after 1 o'clock this afternoon. A spokesperson says the woman died at the scene and the matter will be referred to the coroner and WorkSafe. The social housing waitlist has hit a record high with nearly 22,000 applicants on the register. The latest public housing update for September shows the number of applicants on the waitlist jumped by just over 1,000 on the previous month. The figures also show 2,500 people went onto the waitlist, while just over 600 were housed. The government has cut Latin from the NCEA and deleted other subjects from Level 1 of the qualification. In changes announced today, it says NCEA Level 1 includes too many specialised subjects and it doesn't want students narrowing their options too soon. It says Latin is studied by 200 students and will be dropped from all levels of the qualification. An unprecedented combination of numbers drawn by South Africa's National Lottery has sparked accusations of fraud after 20 people won the jackpot. The winning sequence of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and a Powerball numbered 10 sent social media users into a frenzy, alleging the results had been fixed. Those are the headlines. Our next news and sport update is at 6.
Thanks, Kaimwin. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. The Retirement Commissioner is, mulling over a complete shake-up of the sector. What does that mean?
Yeah, the
Complete
Commissioner's
shake-up?
Office, my God, I'm having a tough day, released a discussion document on the Retirement Villages Act, which is about 17 years old. The paper looks at the current framework of the sector, identifies some issues and puts forward some possible remedies. And some of the things that it's calling for a review on are the buyback and resell of units, how that's done, and also whether capital gains that a unit accrues over a time while someone is inhabiting it, whether those should be shared between the operator and the person's estate. So, quite some drastic changes there if they were to ever come into force.
So you're talking about, just to be clear, when people buy a unit in a retirement village, often when they die, they get, in essence, a refund, but not the value that's added on top of it.
Exactly. So It's whether or not, the estate, whether or not they would get some slice of the capital gains, because these units, they do increase in price depending on when you do buy them. And Jane writes, and that's the Retirement Commissioner, she says the current commercial model of the sector, that needs to change. She says traditionally, the way people get into retirement villages, they sell their house, they use some of that money to buy a unit, and then they use the rest of the money, they use that to live off. But that's likely to change given the fact that we're seeing declining rates of home ownership, the potential impacts of COVID-19 and other various matters like relating to people's financial health. That suggests that this model might not be able to continue into the future. Unfortunately, she has no solutions. When I asked her about that, she just reaffirmed that this was a discussion document. It's all about getting the wheels moving. Unsurprisingly, though, the Retirement Villages Association, they're opposed to the suggestions and the calls for a review of the sector. They say the regulatory, yes, there are some minor things on the fringes that could be improved, but that's true of all sectors. And they say that the current regulatory framework that governs it is world leading, and there are already sufficient safeguards in place. And they believe that with regard to these concerns about the commercial model of the sector, they say that the free market, that will look after that. Government regulators, they shouldn't be intervening or getting involved. So the submissions on this will close on February 26th. The Retirement Villages Association, they're yet to make their formal submission. But if you are interested, you can visit the Commission for Financial Capabilities website. And on this, 3 of the big retirement village operators that are listed on our NZX, 3 of them saw their share price fall by nearly close to 1% today.
Okay. Westpac Bank has revealed how exposed it is to climate change.
Yeah, the bank has released its first climate risk report, and it comes on the heel of that significant MB report we had yesterday, which found that insurance premiums could increase 5-fold for properties in low-lying areas due to sea level rise, severe climate events, we'll just call it climate change, and worse still, some properties could be refused insurance in the next 20 years. And I know one of our reporters was chasing comments from the banks yesterday as they were pulling a story together. And the banks weren't being very forthcoming, but thankfully we've had this report today from Westpac, and it shows that up to 3% of the bank's lending was at risks to climate change. And that's in its residential and business and agriculture, particularly those areas of lending. And in money terms, Westpac has about $88 billion in net loans for the year to September. And in terms of, so that means about $2.5 billion of its debts are classified as risky. And Westpac's general manager expects some properties in the future will become uninsurable and many people will face increased insurance premiums. And if people can't buy or get insurance, people will have to default on their loans, and it will be the banks that wear the losses. So the ramifications of this are potentially huge. But it wouldn't be surprising to see sometime in the not too distant future that banks will stop lending to particular parts of the country. We may have a situation where there'll be these beautiful wastelands or beautiful parts of the country that will become uninhabitable wastelands because no one can get a mortgage or get insurance to live there. But Westpac says In response to this report they put out today, they say it's increasing its proportion of lending to climate change solutions. I don't really know what that means, but they say it's reducing its lending to fossil fuel industries and it's stopped lending to coal mining altogether.
And those are big numbers, but that's just one bank. So
that's
the big
just
picture,
one
bank. Interesting. Okay, tell us what's been going on in the markets today, Nicholas.
Our NZX closed down 80 points to 12,649, possibly dragged down by those retirement village operators. They're big players in the market. Our dollar is at 70.6 US cents, 95.3 Australian and 52.8 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News. The social housing waitlist has reached a record high. Nearly 22,000 applicants are now on the housing register. While the government is promising to deliver an extra 18,000 public and transitional houses by 2024, the Housing Minister, Megan Woods, says even though they're trying to speed up the building of new state homes, it will take time. But concerns remain about what's happening to state house tenants being forced to move out of old homes to make way for new ones. Our social issues reporter, Sarah Robson, has this story.
Everything about this is awesome. Look, still boxes there, but storage, once you get everything compact and everything like that, because everything of mine is...
Jonah Hawkes just moved into a brand new state house in the West Auckland suburb, New Lynn.
And then the lounge. Look how huge it is. And that's storage all right underneath
The Kāinga Ora development on Tom Street includes 80 new standalone and terraced homes, as well as apartments, ranging from 1 through to 5 bedrooms. They replaced 16 houses built on the site in the 1940s.
I'm really pleasantly surprised. The gates came off those units and that down there, and my daughter wanted to go down and have a look, and so we just turned left and went down, and there's a park down there for kids, and we were both saying, oh, you know what, with the amount of children that'll be coming in here, a park would be awesome, and a barbecue.
Planning for the development began under the last national government. Resource consent was lodged back in 2016. The first homes were completed in June last year, with the rest finished last month and opened by Housing Minister Megan Woods. She says the government has moved quickly to get more state houses built.
I think it is worth noting that we've been exceeding our targets as a government, so that we are already exceeding the momentum that we had forecast for ourselves. But we understand what a pressing issue this is.
As the social housing waitlist grows, Megan Woods says they're constantly looking at new ways to speed up construction, whether it be using off-site manufacturing or pre-panel building techniques.
We are building more houses as a government than have been built in a generation. We need to keep up that momentum, but we are acutely aware that this won't be fixed overnight.
Megan Woods says as well as the state houses currently being built, 3,000 more will begin construction in the next 12 months. 7,000 more are in the planning, feasibility and procurement stages. But concerns remain about some of the major redevelopment projects which have forced people to move out to make way for new houses. Jonah Hawke lived in her last state house in Mount Albert for 10 years. But her old neighbourhood is now a busy construction site with hundreds of new homes planned in the next few years.
I feel like we've been wrenched because there was 30 houses in my street that all of us got taken out. Not one of those people, not one of us got put back into Mount Albert.
Ronji Tanielu from the Salvation Army says efforts to build more public houses should be applauded. But he believes the focus needs to be on regenerating and revitalising communities.
When there's a rush, when there's speed, sometimes you miss some really key things. I think when it comes to some of the major redevelopment projects happening in Auckland and Mangere and Porirua, I think one of the things we need to be mindful of is gutting and destroying that local community in favour of just getting a whole bunch of houses.
Despite the upheaval, Jonah Hawke is optimistic.
This is home already, yeah.
Kāinga Ora says people who are affected by development projects, like the one in Mount Albert, are given the option to return to their original neighbourhood. But it says some have opted to move permanently into homes in other areas, while others will return once suitable housing is available. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
One of the vaccines New Zealand is pinning its hopes on has been given the green light in the UK, and rollout is due to start there in the next few days. While it hasn't been approved here yet, speculation about a possible scheme has already begun. So what might it look like? Katie Doyle has the story.
It's been a long time coming, but with trials ramping up around the world, a COVID-19 vaccine could be on our shores early next year. New Zealand's hopes are being pinned on two vaccines, Pfizer-BioNTech and Janssen, the former having just received authorisation in the UK for rollout. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says work to approve a vaccine here is underway.
We will only start administering the vaccines in New Zealand once we're confident, 100% confident that they're safe, and once the approval process has been completed. So unlike some of those other countries who are starting to use the vaccine just almost out of desperation, using their emergency provisions, we won't be doing that in New Zealand. We do want the clinical trials to be finished.
Details of a New Zealand rollout are being kept heavily under wraps and are expected to be announced in the next week or two. So what happens once a vaccine arrives? Dr. Brian Betty from the Royal College of General Practitioners says doctors will likely be able to order stock through a central repository. However, that's not without risks. Earlier this year, GPs faced frustrating waits for influenza vaccines because of distribution problems.
There can't be a repeat of what's happened with flu. We would expect there to be, as said, discussions with the ministry and the government over this to ensure that any rollout was organised, it actually targeted and reached the people it needed to reach, and that general practice was supported and funded to carry out that vaccination.
Vaccinologist Dr. Helen Pertussis-Harris, who was also part of the Science and Technical Advisory Group for the COVID-19 vaccine, reckons that's a fair concern. But high-level planning is happening.
We had the measles play out and the MMR play out and then the flu play out. Not very well, but I think we're going to see something very different this time, and the logistics and the organisation going into this are incredible.
In the UK, vaccine priority is being given to elderly residents and staff in care homes, health staff and people over the age of 80. Dr. Sue Kringle from the University of Otago, who's also on the Technical Advisory Group, reckons a similar priority list will be introduced here.
To some extent, who our priority groups are is going to change depending on what's happening in the country. So at the moment, pretty much all of our cases at the moment are at border in managed isolation and quarantine. Everyone working at the border has to be a priority group.
Their immediate families would also be a priority alongside health workers, patients, the elderly, Māori and Pacifica, as well as people living with long-term conditions. Dr. Kringle says it's important the system has all it needs to roll out the vaccine effectively.
Making sure we've got enough of the right needles and syringes and, that we've got enough of a workforce, all of those kinds of things so that we can roll it out as smoothly as possible.
To date, the Ministry of Health has purchased 9 large freezers that can hold more than 1.5 million doses of vaccines like Pfizer-BioNTech, which needs to be stored at about negative 70 degrees Celsius. The freezers are due to arrive in the country by the end of this year and will most likely be installed in Auckland, with some in the South Island. In a statement, the ministry said it was still working through what would be needed for distribution throughout the country. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
As the cap on the number of international arrivals allowed into Australia each week eases, more stranded Australians are able to go home. But in some cases, they're not going to be able to bring their loved ones. Migration agents say it's proving particularly difficult to obtain entry visas for de facto partners of Australian citizens, even when they provide evidence of compelling and compassionate grounds for an exemption. The ABC's Barbara Miller reports.
Later today, Jennifer Gilmore will be given a brief respite from hotel quarantine in Sydney for the saddest of occasions. She'll be allowed out to stand socially distanced from the rest of her family at her father's cremation.
We found out on the 11th of November that my father had passed very suddenly, and we thought, OK, I'm going to have to go back to Australia as soon as possible.
The 27-year-old who lives in Berlin wanted the emotional support of her German partner of 3 years through the long journey home and 2 weeks of quarantine. Travel exemptions for foreign de facto partners can be granted in compelling and compassionate circumstances. Jennifer Gilmore felt she had those, but found the application process arduous.
It's a very invasive process, this whole de facto.
The application was eventually denied. The reason given was that her circumstances did not outweigh the risk to the Australian community. A subsequent application to New South Wales Health to not do hotel quarantine but to self-isolate was also rejected because she came from a high-risk country and was transiting through other countries. It's left the model and recent graduate of biomedical sciences feeling her efforts were in vain from the word go.
The stress and the trauma of going through such an application process could have been avoided if I had known that we were never going to be granted these exemptions. And I just feel really like I've been treated with such brutality by our nation. There's been no compassion.
It seems to be a bit of a lotto sometimes.
It's the kind of story all too familiar to Edwina King, a WA-based migration agent.
There's definitely an issue with consistency in the travel exemption assessments at the moment. And the assessment doesn't seem to line up with the information that's given on the Department of Home Affairs website, which is quite misleading.
In what way?
So often people will apply and think they're eligible because they'll think, look, we're in a de facto relationship or this ground is very compelling to me. But ultimately, if the case officer thinks the risk is too high, they'll still refuse the exemption.
In a statement to AM, Australian Border Force said up to the end of October, just over 25,000 foreign nationals had had inbound travel exemption requests approved. Almost 27,000 had had applications denied. Border Force was unable to say how many of those applications were made on compelling and compassionate grounds. Jennifer Gilmore says she now wishes she'd never applied.
And what I'm trying to say to the people that may be listening is that hold off from doing such a thing and concentrate on your grief.
And returning Australian Jennifer Gilmore ending the ABC's Barbara Miller's report there. It is 8 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A major retail chain's decision to stock dolls with Down syndrome means children will have better access to toys that reflect them, according to one advocacy group. The dolls with Downs will join the Kmart range that already includes an amputee doll, a visually impaired doll and a doll with a wheelchair. Zandra Vaccarino from the Down Syndrome Association says it's great the dolls will now be widely available and more affordable.
We have had dolls being done before, but I guess the difference is really great here. It's mainstream. It's available to everybody, where it was before a little bit of a niche market for parents to be able to access dolls, so that when their children looked in mirrors and had a doll that looked like they did and that they really enjoyed playing with versus what was available on the shelf. So it's really great to see it being available to everyone, and any child could pick it up off the shelf and say, that's the doll I want.
So previously, has it been a bit of a hunt, really, to find one?
Well, not so much of a hunt, but I guess it was more available to people in the Down syndrome community in the world. I mean, we've certainly had them available to our families in the past, but the price point would have been different as well, so this makes it much more accessible.
So you've had an opportunity to see the dolls. What do they look like? What do you like about them? What do you think of them?
Well, I think it's really lovely for children with Down syndrome and their families to be able to go into a store and buy a doll that the child would really like. I think that the dolls are really cute, and I think that at their price, they're really a good price, and I would hope that there would be slightly wider range as well, so that any child in New Zealand could go in and find a doll that looked like they did.
And so for people who haven't seen them, what makes them special or specific to Down syndrome?
Well, I think what they've done with these little dolls is they've done some of the facial features. I mean, all children with Down syndrome look more like their family members than they do like people with Down syndrome, but there are some things that might be more common in children with Down syndrome, and some of those features have been captured in the little children's faces.
So for your family, you have a son with Down syndrome who's a little bit older now, but would toys like this have been available to him when he was a young boy?
No, he's 25 now, and they certainly weren't at the time. I remember looking for dolls because and there wasn't anything at that time. But since then, they have been available in the market. In Australia, they have quite a different selection, and I know that there's quite a few in Europe as well. And as I say, we've had them available in New Zealand as well, but definitely at a different price point.
So this is one thing, right? You say bringing it into more accessible stores at a price that more families can afford. Are there any other things that you would like to see change in around this in terms of reflecting our whole community? I
think that would be really great. I mean, the New Zealand Down Syndrome as an organisation really does welcome any initiative that promotes diversity and encourages inclusivity and raises awareness around Down syndrome. And I think when you look at the dolls, if it's just a little boy and girl that I saw, it definitely doesn't represent the full diversity of the Down syndrome community. It would be just looking at a particular population group in the Down syndrome community. So it would be good to see it extended. But I think it's really wonderful to see that it's available on the shelf when people go Christmas shopping. And I would hope that other children in the community would go, I'd love a doll like that, and that it's not exclusively for children with Down syndrome, but it's for everybody as they embrace that everyone is different and we're all diverse, and that's lovely. And so it would be wonderful to see those dolls in many more homes.
When you say you'd like to see a little bit more diversity in the doll range, are you talking about the fact that the two dolls that are currently being displayed, they're Pākehā?
They are. And we certainly have a very wide community that the New Zealand Down Syndrome Association represents. We're here for all cultural groups, and we like to try and support them. So that is just a doll available for one particular cultural group.
Zandra Vaccarino from the Down Syndrome Association. To the United States now, where two sisters are making medical history. A Tennessee couple who struggled with infertility now have two little girls. The sisters came from donated embryos that were frozen more than 2 decades ago. Emma Gibson was a 25-year-old embryo, but her little sister Molly, who was born in October, was 27 years in the making. Gwendolyn Decree reports.
Babies are said to be gifts.
Oh, hey!
Some come naturally, while others are a special delivery, like these two sisters, here by way of embryo adoption.
The fact that it is here and we are holding these miracles, I mean, unbelievable.
Molly and Emma Gibson are two of the oldest frozen embryos to be born, both frozen more than 2 decades. They were thawed at the National Embryo Donation Center in Knoxville after their parents struggled to have a baby on their own.
Ben has cystic fibrosis, and so that causes infertility in a lot of men.
The donation center is giving this family and nearly 200 others from across North America a chance at parenthood.
How does it work?
They have to be able to carry the pregnancy themselves, and we do have an age limit that the woman must not have passed her 46th birthday.
The center takes a woman's fertilized egg and plants it into a separate mom-to-be. Their process, embryologist Carol Sommerfeld says, works more than half the time.
These donated embryos are coming from successful IVF cycles. In other words, the couples donating the embryos were successful, and that's why they still have embryos remaining.
Though oftentimes successful, potential parents come in filled with concerns. First thought,
what are the health aspects of this?
I had a few complications throughout my pregnancy, but they were nothing that was uncommon to have.
The center reports as long as the embryos are stored correctly, they're viable indefinitely. The proof?
2 healthy babies and a healthy husband. God's been good. We've been grateful.
This couple's 2 new gifts.
And that was Gwendolyn Decree reporting there. Time for some of your feedback now on the Cook Islands bubble. The Cooks not yet, this person says in capital letters. If the scheme fails, the Cook Islands are truly messed up. Can't help but think back to Samoa and measles, says Mike. Anne's got in touch to say Kiwi expats, Northern Territory Oz, should be able to come in without the quarantine. They have had no positive cases, says Anne. On the general issue of COVID testing, and this relates to the Pakistan cricket team, a lot of you thinking that everybody should be tested on arrival on day 0, day 1. That is how to secure our border. Someone else says, shame on the Ministry of Health. All international arrivals should be tested on day 1. And someone else says, I've been bleating on about the necessity to test on day 1.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, ko Kainwin Curtis tēnei. The social housing waitlist has hit a record high with nearly 22,000 applicants on the register. The latest public housing update for September shows the number of people on the waitlist jumped by just over 1,000 on the previous month. Here's our social issues reporter Sarah Robson.
The figures from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development show 2,500 people went onto the waitlist in September, while over 600 were housed. More than 19,000 of those waiting for a house fall into the Priority A category, which is people in the most need. Close to 4,000 people are waiting to be transferred to a new house. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Some tourism operators say they're at their wits' end after months of promised updates and ongoing delays to putting the Cook Islands travel bubble in place. This comes as the COVID-19 response minister popped any plans of a bubble before Christmas. Chris Hipkins says a timeline on the next steps will be available in the coming weeks. But Craig Bennett of Sea Change Villas in Rarotonga, who says he's quickly losing patience over a lack of action. He says the ministers in the Cook Islands and New Zealand should be able to sit down and figure something out. The Maori Party co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Packer pulled no punches in her maiden speech describing early New Zealand governments as monsters, murderers and rapists. The party's returned to Parliament after losing in 2017, with hundreds of supporters travelling to Wellington for the speeches. Co-leader Rawere Waititi paid tribute to party founder Dame Tariana Turia and called for the Crown to apologise for the wrongs of the past. Ms Ngarewa-Packer got straight to the point.
I stand here as a descendant of a people who survived a Holocaust, a genocide sponsored by this House and members of Parliament whose portraits still hang from the walls. Members of this Parliament who sought our extermination and created legislation to achieve it.
The Maori Party co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Packer. Oranga Tamariki has signed another strategic partnership with iwi, Ngāti Toa Rangatira and Te Atiawa. It's the 7th the ministry has formed since 2017. Oranga Tamariki has come under public scrutiny with several inquiries into the ministry. Most recently, the Waitangi Tribunal heard an urgent inquiry that heard evidence about the ministry's partnerships. Te Urua Nanganui o Te Atiawa Chief Executive Wirangi Luke says the partnership will provide more resources to support networks to ensure the best outcomes for their children. Oranga Tamariki says Ngāti Toa and Te Atiawa will be involved in the design, delivery and evaluation of services for their tamariki and whānau. A woman charged after the death of a man in Wellsford has appeared in the North Shore District Court. The 21-year-old was granted bail and remanded to appear again on December the 16th. She's been charged with being an accessory after the fact to murder. Police say the woman handed herself in to police and who are investigating the death of Zane Smith in Wellsford, north of Auckland, at the weekend. Convicted Marlborough Sounds murderer Scott Watson has had his latest bid for parole declined today. He's serving a life sentence for the killings of Olivia Hope and Ben Smart on New Year's Day in 1998. Watson, who continues to maintain his innocence, has now appeared before the board 3 times. The US government hopes to vaccinate 100 million people against the coronavirus by the end of February if regulators approve the new vaccines against the disease. A scientific advisor says this would represent 40% of adult Americans, including those considered most at risk. Approval of Pfizer and BioNTech's vaccine is expected in the coming weeks, and that of Moderna soon after. The US has set a new record for daily death tolls at more than 2,500, and hospitalisations related to COVID-19 have surpassed 100,000 cases. New Zealand recorded 9 new cases of COVID-19 in managed isolation today, 4 active and 5 historical, including 2 members of the Pakistan men's cricket team. A young climate activist has urged Christchurch City Council to halt plans on a proposed airport. 4 groups concerned over plans to build an international airport at Tarras in central Otago spoke for 10 minutes today at a council meeting. School for Strike climate activist Cara Foley was one of the opponents.
To be developing an unsustainable airport that we do not need, especially when this money could be invested in far more sustainable local projects. I am ashamed to live under a council who freely calls climate activists inspiring and then turns around and does something so objectively opposed to our mission.
Cara Foley says building the airport in Tarras would completely undermine the government's decision to declare a climate emergency. In sport, an impressive second wicket partnership between Kane Williamson and Tom Latham has put New Zealand in a strong position on day one of the first cricket test against the West Indies in Hamilton. Latham has just been bowled out for 86 runs after combining with Williamson for a 154-run partnership following debutant Will Young's dismissal for 5 runs. A short time ago, the Black Caps were 172 for 2, with Ross Taylor joining Williamson at the batting crease. The West Indies won the toss and chose to bowl first. The Wallabies will have some welcome experience back in the playmaker roles, with James O'Connor named to start at first 5 for their final Tri-Nations rugby test against Argentina this weekend. O'Connor has missed Australia's 3 other matches in the tournament through injury, and his return means a switch to fullback for Reece Hodge, who started at first 5 in the win over the All Blacks and a draw with Argentina. Both the Wallabies and Pumas have only mathematical chances of taking the Tri-Nations title off the All Blacks. Australia need to win the match by 101 points, while the equation is only marginally easier for the Pumas, who need a 93-point victory to win the title. Manchester United have blown the chance to seal a place in the knockout phase of European football's Champions League, going down 3-2 to last season's runner-up, Paris Saint-Germain. Chelsea have finished top of their group with a game to spare after trouncing Sevilla 4-0. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Eric Brenstrom has the world's weather, including an update on seawater temperatures around Aotearoa. We have another kōrero on Māori art with Taina Moitula. International Relations Specialist Nina Hall surveys the scene post the US elections, presidential ones anyway, and Emma Jane Hogg, who's crocheting baubles shaped like COVID viruses just in time for Christmas, on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland to Waitomo, also Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine weather today, cloudy periods tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Waited Upper, fine weather. Taupo, Taumaranui, Taihape and Taranaki to Wellington. Fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow with isolated showers north of Wellington. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine weather but a few showers about the ranges of northwest Nelson and a few spots of rain over Canterbury tomorrow. Babola, cloudy periods with a few showers. Westland, Fiordland, showers turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Otago, Southland, showers about the south coast today, otherwise fine. Showers spreading throughout for a time tomorrow, possibly heavy in the east tomorrow afternoon or evening. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with patchy rain clearing this evening, but developing again tomorrow afternoon. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The COVID Recovery Minister has burst any dreams of a Cook Islands travel bubble by Christmas, but has the message been officially delivered to the islands? New Zealand government officials visited Rarotonga last month to assess when quarantine-free travel can start between the countries. Tourist operators there are desperate to throw down the welcome mat with the industry that's reliant on foreign tourists decimated by the global COVID pandemic. But Chris Hipkins says there needs to be more work done on testing and contact tracing, and he's not expecting any travel this side of Christmas. Well, joining me now is Fletcher Melvin from the Cook Islands Chamber of Commerce. You've heard the Minister's comments there, Fletcher. What is your reaction to the fact he reckons no travel before Christmas?
Firstly, I'd just like to address that, the article itself. The article doesn't actually stating that there won't be any travel, and so we're just sort of hoping that he's talking about questions they still have yet to be answered, and we are hoping that the report that the officials have yet to furnish to our government will point out some of the gaps on this side and then in New Zealand. I do hear that there's concerns even on the New Zealand end about how is New Zealand prepared to bring back their citizens and how that's going to be done. That's questions for the New Zealand side. For our side, we do know that there are some gaps already that pointed out, and they are pretty small in terms of, getting more testing kits. The contact tracing itself, we've got about 70% of the population already using that and already able to be that to be rolled out even further. So we're confident that on our side we have done as much as we can.
So Fletcher, just to be clear, do you still hold out some hope that there will be quarantine-free travel between the Cook Islands and New Zealand before Christmas?
I do. We do, actually. We are still waiting for that official announcement from the New Zealand government, and that was supposed to be next week. So it caught us all by surprise, but having looked at that is, we still think that is an official position by the New Zealand government.
Do you think Chris Hipkins has misspoken here?
We do think that. We're hoping. If he hasn't, then that would be definitely be alarming for us. But it seems that it was a bit premature. We've had some indication that may have been a bit premature, and that there will be an official announcement coming soon.
When was the last time you heard from New Zealand officials?
The government, the Cook Islands government, has told us that they're in daily talks with the New Zealand officials, and that includes today, where government and officials on this side have been, furiously contacting New Zealand to see change. And we're still hopeful that there will be an official response coming soon.
You talked there about contact tracing, because this was one of the issues that Chris Hipkins raised. And he said they need to be sure about contact tracing. When you say about 70% of people are engaged with some form of contact tracing, what is it? Is it an app? What are you using there?
Oh, so we're using it is an app that sits on. So it's a bit different to New Zealand. On this side, we have it's a physical QR code that people carry. They go in and they log into a premises. So instead of a app that people carry on their phones, this is a physical QR code that people carry around. The reason we do that is that not all the population carries cell phones. Not all visitors will have compatible cell phones. So we've found a way that people can all carry their a contact tracing QR code, and that it is a lot easier for this to roll out. So we're quite confident that is something that's suitable for the Cook Islands.
So do you reckon that 70% coverage with that form of tracing is enough to open your borders to Kiwis?
Oh, it's certainly in Rarotonga. We are now working hard to get that to the outer islands. But the reason that we did do the contact tracing the way we did was because of the outer islands of the Cook Islands, where they don't have all access to internet. We're doing everything possible. We're trying to mirror as much as we can what's happening in New Zealand, and we're confident that that if we follow what New Zealand is doing, their best practices, we can open up.
I know you don't want to contemplate this, but given the comments that the Minister has made here, he said there'll be more progress made before Christmas, but no travel in a bubble before Christmas. If that is the case, what does that mean for businesses in the Cooks? Tourism?
Well, it's going to be pretty dire. I mean, most companies have said that, we've been talking about this bubble for a while now, and most companies have said that, this past next year, they won't be able to keep their doors open. They will be forced to close. A lot of the shareholders have said they can't pump any more money into their companies if they don't have any confidence that the economy some form of economy will return. So it's the final decision. Most of them have left it for December because we've said that the indications have been that there will be a bubble established. On this side, we still don't understand why there isn't any quarantine-free travel for people coming from the Cook Islands, at least.
Do you think that the New Zealand government's dragging its heels here, Fletcher?
Yes. I mean, it does seem that way certainly for the business community. It doesn't seem there is any reason for for people on this side to be quarantined. It costs $3,000 for us to go in quarantine when we don't have it. So it seems a pretty easy decision. They've come over, they've confirmed we don't have COVID here. Why is that decision still in place? There are people here that so many people here that can't get medical checkups. For instance, I have two people that came in and said they normally visit 12 times a year in New Zealand. They've only been 4 times, and their condition means that they're in constant pain. And that is an indication of just a lot of things that are unable to be done on this end.
So it's not just tourists, it's about getting access to essential services, medical services and specialist people.
Absolutely. And at this time of year, we've just noticed that there are so many contracts that are now up for, that are ending at the end of the year. People that are leaving the country that provide essential services, that if the economy doesn't open, then people can't hold them in country. That includes health professionals, that includes people that work in daily services that we require, including veterinarians, by the way. Some of the veterinarians are leaving. So a lot of things are slowly, coming to an end. And we simply need the economy to function to hold these professionals in country.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Fletcher Melvin, who is from the Cook Islands Chamber of Commerce. The political consensus over an inquiry into Pharmac looks to be breaking down, with Labour and National at odds over how it should run. National today asked the newly formed Health Select Committee to begin an investigation, only for the bid to be voted down by MPs from other parties. The government says work is already underway on the inquiry, and National's antics are in bad faith. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Malcolm Mulholland is tired of waiting for an inquiry into Pharmac. He chairs Patient Voice Aotearoa, spurred to action when his wife Wiki was diagnosed with breast cancer. For years, he's been calling for reform.
It has saddened me to see so many petitions go forward and so many patients' hopes and dreams being dashed at the same time. For Labour, actually to wake up and say, hey, there is actually an issue here and we need to look at it.
A breakthrough was made during the election campaign. At last, political consensus. Labour joined the other parties in promising an inquiry into the drug buying agency. Today, National sought to get it started.
We came to the very first Health Select Committee ready to be constructive, to be positive, to keep our campaign promises. That promise was that we'd initiate an inquiry into Pharmac. We put that on the table and the Labour government voted it down.
The opposition health spokesperson Shane Reti says it's disappointing and casts doubt on the government's commitment.
Where's the urgency? This could have been initiated today. It was to initiate, and I don't have any sense that any time soon they're going to come around to it, and that's not good enough.
But the government says it is already moving, that work is underway right now on deciding the appropriate reviewers and their terms of reference. The Health Minister, Andrew Little, is questioning National's motives. He says a select committee is simply not the right body to investigate.
We're committed to doing a review of Pharmac. It needs to be at arm's length from politicians. It is not right for politicians to be making political judgments about Pharmac and its decisions. There are high-level policy decisions, but it is better that they are reviewed at arm's length and independently.
It's a point Mr Mulholland is pleased to hear. He wants urgency, but he also wants independence, an expert eye asking the tough questions.
Is Pharmac motivated or centred around patient outcomes? Is our budget fit for purpose? Because when we compare to other OECD countries, we seem to be miles behind the rest of the world. And why are we so slow in approving those medications?
The Minister says there will be more details soon, but there are already questions over whether the inquiry will have enough teeth, with Mr Little admitting it's unlikely it'll have access to commercial information. The election brought political parties together on this matter, but the unity doesn't look like lasting long. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
It's 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's officially a climate emergency, but what will it cost the country? Parliament yesterday voted for the emergency declaration, which comes with a commitment for the public service to be carbon neutral by 2025. And while cleaning it up now will save money later, none of it comes cheap. Rachel Thomas reports.
Westpac Chief Economist Dominic Stevens says dealing with climate change will put some drag on the country's growth.
which he calculates is 0.1% per year. A report commissioned by Westpac in 2018 concluded fast action could save New Zealand $30 billion by 2050. Dominic Stevens says no one can say for sure how much cash is needed, but one thing is certain.
This will be costly. I think a lot of people sort of talk about, well, there will be innovation to deal with climate change and it could transform the economy, and that is all true, but you have to remember that is a silver lining. Economies are complex things and they're amazing at getting around big issues, as was seen with COVID, but it's still going to be costly. And I think the cost is actually going to be quite significant.
Researcher Belinda Story says by 2050, insurance for some coastal homes in major cities will increase fivefold due to climate risks. A conservative estimate sees the cost of insurance for 10,000 compromised homes increase by $200 per week. Climates researcher Dr. Jim Salinger from Victoria University says the longer we wait to tackle sea level rise, the more expensive and difficult things get.
If we just let it happen, what happens is the insurance companies, and they're signalling it may be uninsurable, or the cost of trying to bail out those properties, they just become higher and higher.
Dr. Salinger has spent 30 years battling for meaningful action on climate change. He says the government's promises yesterday are great, but he remains a little cynical.
Various governments have been dithering around and not getting into it, and climate change continues happening, and we need to walk the talk rather than talk the talk all the time.
Whanganui Mayor Hamish McDougall from Local Government New Zealand says councils that fail to act now may be lumping future ratepayers with a bigger bill.
My theory generally is that it's better to spend money now. If action isn't undertaken, particularly to protect key roading routes and key infrastructure, then it's only going to cost more in the future.
He says billions of dollars worth of local government infrastructure is already at risk from sea level rise of 1.5 metres. Fixing that works out at about $2,000 per adult. But be they politicians, economists or scientists, all agree it's best to start contributing towards these bills now than pay more in the future. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
The child sex offender and prison escaper, Philip John Smith, has been back in court for another legal fight as he pushes to be interviewed by a journalist. Last year, Corrections rejected Stuff's request to interview Smith, but the High Court told them to review it. Corrections appealed that at the Court of Appeal today. Our reporter Jonathan Mitchell was there.
John Smith is serving a life sentence for murdering the father of a boy he was sexually abusing. He escaped to Brazil in 2014 while on day release and was recaptured 6 days later when he was found in a hostel. His desire to be interviewed by Stuff went to the Court of Appeal today. Corrections lawyer Austin Powell told the court appropriate steps were taken when Corrections rejected Stuff's request.
In my submission, the impact of the proposed interview on the victims of the offence clearly is a relevant consideration.
He said requests to interview inmates were becoming more common for prisons to manage.
Requests under Rules 108 and 109 to interview prisoners are becoming a more common feature of prison administration. In some instances, of course, this can be dismissed as prurient curiosity or perhaps morbid fascination with what occurs behind the prison walls. But clearly, in other cases, there may be an important issue that needs to be explored.
Philip John Smith represented himself via video link from prison. He told the 3 judges hearing the case the High Court decision appropriately balanced his freedom to speak versus the rights of his victims.
Her Honour did perform a balancing test, and Her Honour did show concern to upholding the rights of the victims here and the distress that the interview would cause on them.
In 2015, high-profile inmate Arthur Taylor won an appeal to do an interview with TVNZ that was produced and reported a year later. It's the latest court case in a string of litigation involving Smith. In October, he failed to overturn his conviction for escaping to Brazil. He had argued Brazilian authorities did not follow due process in deporting him, and New Zealand authorities failed to question that. However, the Court of Appeal ruled Smith failed to prove there was any abuse of process that would justify overturning his conviction. The Court of Appeal reserved its decision in today's matter. For Checkpoint, Court Jonathan Mitchell-Aho.
The Maori Party is back and louder than ever. The co-leaders, supported by hundreds who travelled the length of the island to be at Parliament today, made their maiden speeches in the House this afternoon. It was pride that Rawiri Waititi sung of as he rose to his feet.
Because you're magic people to me, you're magic people to me. Hold your head up high, let your voices fly. I'm proud to be Maori.
Then came the reason for the Maori Party being in Parliament and a challenge.
I am committed to challenging the reason why the Union Jack consistently smothers Te Tiriti or Waitangi, and I am going to take it off. I will ensure that our unapologetic Maori voice is heard and that our Maori cloak is felt and is present in every piece of legislation and bill passed in this House. You know what it feels like to have a pebble in your shoe? That will be my job here. A constant annoying to those holding on to the colonial ways, reminder and change agent for the recognition of our kahu Māori.
Following a powerful waiata and haka, Debbie Ngarewa-Packer stood to make her maiden speech. She got straight to the point.
I stand here as a descendant of a people who survived a Holocaust, a genocide sponsored by this House and members of Parliament whose portraits still hang from the walls. Members of this Parliament who sought our extermination and created legislation to achieve it. They confiscated all our whenua, imprisoned us without trial, and murdered and raped our women and children, and deliberately engineered our displacement for generations to come.
Ms Ngarewa-Packer went on to reflect on her family's connections to Parihaka, the Poi Air Māori Club, and being the daughter of an Irish Pākehā woman and a Māori dad. Then those who'd travelled to witness the Māori Party comeback joined together in a huge show of support. And that was the two Maori Party co-leaders giving their maiden speeches in Parliament this afternoon and the crowd that followed them there. The Māori All Blacks and Moana Pacifica team have left their training boots on the bus this afternoon for a pōwhiri at the Tūranga Waiwai Marae in northern Waikato. The two teams are in town ahead of an historic clash at Hamilton's FMG Stadium on Saturday night. It's the only time the Māori All Blacks will hit the field this year and the first time they've played in Hamilton since 2008. Our reporter Riley Kennedy went along and filed this report.
A celebration of cultural connections between Māori and Pacifica communities in Aotearoa. That's how the game between the Māori All Blacks and Moana Pacifica is being billed. The two teams welcomed on to the marae today, the Māori King watching on, the pōwhiri slightly revised with no handshaking or hungi because of COVID-19 restrictions. The Māori All Blacks will hit the field with 8 debutants. Coach Clayton McMillan says being in the squad is special.
We put a big emphasis on making sure that we acknowledge the past. You know, we add our own footprint in terms of the present and that we do the jersey justice both on and off the field to ensure that the team has a future and that young people can aspire to be Māori All Blacks and get to do what we do.
Highlanders lock and Māori All Black Manaki Selby Rickett says bringing the two cultures together for the game is important.
I think it's pretty cool today that we got together and we're on a bit of on good terms today, but I think Saturday is going to be a huge difference. So.
Chief Centre Quinn Tupai says it means a lot to be pulling on the black jersey this weekend.
Yeah, it's pretty important for our Māori community to get Māori All Blacks together. It's going to be a
a very attacking game. So now all the boys are looking forward to it.
Super Rugby side in waiting Moana Pacifica's squad is made up of current and former international players and a number of players eligible for international Pacifica teams. One Test All Black and Highlander Josh Ioane will be in the Pacifica backline. He says the side only got together at the beginning of the week but are preparing well.
We came in on Monday, we had a lot of ceremonies, a lot of boys learned a lot about our cultures and stuff like that. And then we got into our Rugby Tuesday, and it's only a week to prepare, but no, we're tracking well.
Newly signed Chiefs lock and starting forward in the Pacifica side, Ngātoi Akoi, says being part of the first ever Moana Pacifica side is a privilege.
Yeah, this is really important. This is quite cool just because it's the first one that we're all a part of, and we get to represent our families and stuff from all the 3 nations, so yeah, it's awesome.
The match, which kicks off at 7:30, caps off a big weekend of international sport in Hamilton, with the first cricket test between the Black Caps and West Indies also taking place at Seddon Park. In Ngarawahia for Checkpoint, Riley Kennedy.
Gotta go, but we will be back tomorrow.
RNZ News at 6:30. The Maori Party co-leader Debbie Ngarewa-Packer has described early New Zealand governments as monsters, murderers and rapists during her maiden speech in Parliament. A child sex offender and prison escaper Philip John Smith has been back in court as he pushes to be interviewed by a journalist. A young climate change activist is urging the Christchurch City Council to halt plans on a proposed airport in the smaller central Otago settlement of Tarras. And one of Australia's leading online retailers, Kogan.com, has bought one of this country's biggest, Mighty Ape. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
It's a democracy and they've got a right to put their head in the sand in a kind of Donald Trump-like manner.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen. Is your head in the sand, as Russell Norman suggests?
No, look, a lot of anger and name-calling.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen. And I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. After the news at 7, I'll be talking to meteorologist Eric Brenstrom about the world's weather and also prospects perhaps for the summer this year. I understand that sea temperatures around New Zealand are warmer than average. What does that mean for the weather on land? More precipitation perhaps. And how is summer trending where you are? Because in Wellington we had our first day of summer, what I would regard as real summer weather today. I think there won't be another one for a few days from now. But you know, this is just a little pocket of the country. What's happening where you are? Text me on 2101. Email nights@rnz.co.nz. If you've got any questions for Eric, text those through as well. Later on in this hour, we've got the House, our report from Parliament, which of course sat today, as you heard in that report from Checkpoint, 2 Maori MPs back in the House. But right now, here is Jessie Chang with the detail.
Kia ora, I'm Jessie Chang, and today on The Detail. A state of civil emergency has been declared in Christchurch as fire crews try desperately to gain the upper hand on 2 raging fronts.
Low rainfall, high sunshine hours, a heat wave and widespread dry conditions have been described as perfect conditions for a fire in Nelson which has burned for the past 3 days.
Port Hills, Nelson, Lake Pukaki, Lake Oho, just some of the most recent devastating fires in New Zealand.
There was nothing but blackness. There was no vegetation. Everything that was still standing above ground was on fire.
Wildfires are estimated to cost New Zealand about $100 million a year, and researchers say fires are getting more extreme and closer to urban centres.
It's not a problem that's just prone to the more remote rural areas. Increasingly, we're seeing these fires involving homes and also, large numbers of people that are being affected and needing to be evacuated.
Today we'll be looking at how much of a role climate change plays in the increasing number and intensity of wildfires. And with summer around the corner, are we prepared? First up though, I'm talking to one landowner who's experienced the nightmare of trying to protect his home from flames.
Let me paint you a verbal picture. As we drove up, the grass was all burned out. Everything was smoking. It was hot as Hades. And as we went around the corner, I saw these massive plumes of smoke, realizing that it was coming from the direction of my house, and I couldn't look.
David Scheel and his family own a cattle farm on the Port Hills in Christchurch. He's a marine scientist at Canterbury University and was on his way home from work when the 2017 fire started.
I was apparently, according to my mate, muttering incantations as we went around the corner, and he yelled out, "Your house is still standing."